initial idea is almost always wrong. And so as an entrepreneur, you got to have an opinion and you got to have a direction you want to go. But then you have to be open-minded to iterate or pivot to find the even better opportunities. And so most ideas that I see are only 10% better than what's out there. And the vast majority of the time, 10% better isn't enough to get people to change. It's got to be 10 times better.
So welcome to Leading with Relevance. This is a podcast series featuring some of today's most prominent leaders, people who I like to say are busting through the status quo, impacting both companies and community. Our goal is to interview high-level people and find out a little bit more about their personal and professional journeys. And we also want to find out about what Simon Sinek said, their why. For you, the listeners, we hope you'll pick up some practical insights that you can apply in your own leadership journey. So I'm Tino Mantella, Chief Strategy Officer for Relevance, and I'm loving the opportunity to interview folks like the one we're going to interview today. And you're going to hear about 15 minutes on this podcast, but then we invite you to also pick up on our website. We're calling it Relevance Overtime, kind of like what 60 Minutes does. And you can find the rest of the podcast there. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing David Cummings. For a lot of you folks listening, you know David. But just to give you a quick summary, and then we're going to get into some of the details related to some of the things I'm going to talk about. But he's a serial entrepreneur. He's an investor in the tech community. He's a landlord. He's a coach. He's definitely an inspirational leader. I think people would say he's now a real estate mogul, and we'll get into that a bit. He's very engaged in the community, and he's been recognized by Ian Wise Entrepreneur of the Year in 2019. And one of my favorites, he's the winner of TAG's prestigious Hall of Fame award. In my personal view, of all the people I know in Atlanta and surrounding area, there's some that go to the top of the list in terms of making an impact on Georgia's technology industry. I remember when I took the job at TAG in 2004, people used to talk about peaches and pecans and pine tree and poultry and peanuts. Nobody talked about payments at that time. So people like David have helped to shift the emphasis in what's happening now in Georgia. People kind of think it's commonplace, but it actually took a lot of work from a lot of people to put Georgia on the map and Atlanta on the map in terms of technology. So David, welcome to Leading with Relevance.
Thanks, Tino. Thanks for having me. I remember us getting together for lunch. I don't know what year it was, probably 2006 or 7, and talking about startups and entrepreneurship. And at the time, I was heavily involved in the TAG Content Management Society. I don't know if you remember when TAG had that a long time ago, and I was pushing for more entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial activity at the TAG level. So it's been incredible to see the growth of the startup community over the last 20 years.
Yeah, for sure. And you had a lot to do with that. And TAG had a little bit to do with it, but not as much maybe on the entrepreneur side. But those 36 societies really helped to put us on the map. When I started, we had about 350 members, and 12 years later, we had 36,000. So it was just kind of part of that whole development of the technology industry here that you and I've seen, and kind of have to.
And kudos to you for building one of the largest technology associations in the world.
Thank you very much. It was a good team effort. So we're going to jump in the first question, and I always like to start by asking you about your childhood, if you were, or what are the kinds of things you're in Tallahassee, Florida. What shaped your formative years, and if you could pick one or two key figures that impacted your values and your trajectory.
So as a kid, I was lucky in that in the mid 80s, my dad brought home a old IBM PC that he had in his office. And so as far back as I can remember, I was playing, video games from Sierra Online, and I was surfing the web on Prodigy and CompuServe and AOL in the early to mid 90s. And so for me, it's just been something that's been a part of my everyday life. And so I've always loved computers. I've always loved technology. When I was in middle school, a friend was kind enough to give me a book, Teach Yourself C in 21 days. And so I started doing some computer programming as an eighth grader. And then by the time I got to high school, the .com heyday was starting to ramp up. And then by the time I got to college, it was full blown .com everything. And so I just feel very lucky and very blessed that I was able to be exposed to technology at an early age. And then as I grew up to have more and more opportunities with it. And so I was always inspired by the big names of the 90s, Bill Gates and Michael Dell and names like that. I would read the computer magazines and I would read Inc. magazine for the startup entrepreneur side and just always trying to, soak up as much information as I could find. And so that's been a big part of it, just lots of tinkering and lots of reading and experimenting.
So fast forwarding, you went to Duke and you have a degree, I think, in economics. So I guess there probably wasn't necessarily a degree in entrepreneurship, but did you have aspirations at that time when you arrived at Duke to actually start businesses and be an entrepreneur?
Absolutely. Yeah. When I was in, eighth grade learning to code, by ninth grade, I was building different apps and selling them online. And by 11th and 12th grade, it was .com time. So I was building websites for all kinds of businesses and, nonprofits and doing different IT consulting projects really around the web. And so for me, economics as a college major was the closest thing I could get to a business degree.
Right.
But as a self-taught programmer, I could figure out whatever I needed to get done on my own, as well as with the help of others. And so that was why I went that route in college.
So it's a good segue when you say help of others, because during college you started Hand and Hill. Talk a
Hmm.
little bit about that. And I understand a professor gave you like 20 grand to kick it off. How did that all take place?
Yeah. So my freshman year, first semester, had a professor who was famous in the academic world for using technology for foreign language learning. And so he had written a bunch of grants and built technologies and all around foreign language learning. So he was a German professor, but his area of interest was technology. And so we developed a great relationship. And by the time I got to my junior year, I was ready for, more startup life and a little less college life. And so I went to him and pitched him on an idea that I had. Back then it was novel. Today it's commonplace, but the idea is really around using technology to update and maintain a website. So 25 years ago, if you had a
Yep.
website, you would email a change to a webmaster, and some point in time that update would take place. And nowadays it's super easy with WordPress and Squarespace and Wix and all the different tools out there. But 25 years ago, it was a big challenge to update and maintain a website. And so I had been building websites for a few years during the .com boom, and the proverbial light bulb went off. Hey, why don't I build software, real software, to make it easy for non-technical people to update and maintain a website? And so that was my first real idea. And so I pitched my professor on the idea, and he said, "Sounds great. I love it." And so he wrote the check for $20,000, and I was off to the races.
I guess you paid him back somewhere along the line.
Yeah, he made a good return on his
I
money.
figured he's a good ROI. Um, so carrying forward with Hand and Hill, you moved to Atlanta to follow a client here. Is that what brought you here, or were there a bunch of different things?
That's right. Yeah, so I started it in my dorm room as a junior, and our biggest customer when I graduated was a hotel management company based in Atlanta. And so I was looking for a big city to go to after graduation. Atlanta was always a place that I enjoyed going to growing up in North Florida because it was, the regional big city. And of course, came through Atlanta many times on flights to different places.
Right.
And so reached out to our largest customer when I graduated and said, "Hey, what are your thoughts about Atlanta? Is it a good place to build a business? Would you recommend it? What's the business community like?" And so they were super gracious and said, "Hey, come on down. We've got a little extra office space in Buckhead. We're right near Lenox Mall. Lots of young people, lots of great things going on in Atlanta." And I went down, loved it, and I've been here ever since. And so
Yeah.
that's, 22 years ago now.
We're happy you came here. So Did this part I don't know. Did you sell Hand and Hill before you started Pardot, or was there some gap there?
No, no. So the idea for Pardot came out of Hand and
Hand and
Hill.
Hill.
And so Hand and Hill doing the web content management software, I was heavily involved in the sales and marketing side, trying to grow the business as fast as we could. And so I found a lack of marketing tools that were focused on the business marketer. So most of the tools at the time were focused on the consumer marketer, like a MailChimp or Google Analytics. And so I had the aha moment of, hey, why don't I start a new company to really focus on online lead gen and customer acquisition and email marketing, but really around the business marketer as opposed to the consumer marketer. And so started Pardot inside of the Hand and Hill offices.
And that you ended up selling, correct me if I'm wrong, in 5 years to, I have exact targets slash Salesforce, but
Yeah,
for,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
for a
And
good
so
amount of money. And was that a big decision for you? How did that all transpire?
yeah, it was one of those things where, if you could wave a magic wand and everything would go right, plenty of learnings along the way and ups and downs. But overall, the general journey was very much up and to the right in terms of growth and timing and the market and the value that the software provided and just really the whole experience. It was phenomenal. So we started it in early 2007 and we sold it in October of 2012. And it was just a great business at the right market at the right time. And really the idea was, small to mid-size business marketing automation. So it was software for generating leads online, nurturing the leads, messaging them with email, connecting to the CRM, scoring and grading the leads so you can understand the quality of the leads and where they were in the sales cycle. And so the business was great. And we, sold it after 5.5 years and had a great outcome.
And we used to, when I first got to Tag, I used to hear stories about the Georgia entrepreneurs. I'm sure you've heard this term too, two cars in a boat kind of guys. That
Yes. Yeah.
they
Two
didn't
Cadillacs in a
necessarily,
boat.
yeah,
Yeah.
they didn't necessarily think about their next thing. But what was your transition to the next one after that? Did you say, okay, I got to do another one, or you already had, knowing you probably had a couple of things in mind as you were selling that one?
I did. I did. One of the experiences that I had during both Hand and Hill and Pardot, Hand and Hill was on the Inc. 500, number 247, and then Pardot was also on the Inc. 500. Inc. magazine publishes a list of the fastest growing private
Right.
companies, and so Pardot was number 147 on the Inc. 500. And so as part of that experience with fast growing startups, we never knew how much office space we were going to need. And we didn't want to sign up for a 7 to 10 year lease and get a bunch of space that we might or might not need. And so we played the game of sublease roulette. And so we were constantly bouncing between subleases, and one would be for 12 months and one would be for 18 months. And, when the lease was coming up, we'd always, never know what the quality or the availability was going to be for the next one. And so that experience led to the idea for the Atlanta Tech Village. And so the idea for the Tech Village, while nowadays it seems common with all the different co-working spaces and tech collaboration spaces, 12 years ago when we started it, it was novel. It was
Right.
essentially the only game in town. And the big idea was, instead of doing subleases, let's get a big building, in this case, 100,000 square feet. Let's put it in a great location, in this case, right in the heart of the financial district of Buckhead, right near an interstate, right near a train station, right near a bunch of restaurants and activities. Let's outfit the whole building. So beautiful space, furniture, fiber internet, snacks, drinks, continuing education, tons of programs. And then instead of doing 7 to 10 year leases, let's just rent everything by the room or by the desk. And let's do it month to month so that the startups can expand or contract as they need and really make it the center of gravity from the startup community. And so we've been at it for 12 years now at the Atlanta Tech Village, and we've helped facilitate thousands, literally thousands of startups in Atlanta that have gone on to produce, 10,000 jobs and raise literally billions of dollars of equity and create $10 billion of enterprise value. So, it's something that's taken on a life of its own, and, the outcome from it is greater than anything that I could have ever imagined. And I think partly it was, the right place at the right time. And, Atlanta had so many great startup activities going on, but Atlanta is a big city and it's spread out in lots of submarkets. And so by having a huge center of gravity, we were able to tap into a bunch of latent demand where entrepreneurs wanted to be around each other. And then from a timing point of view, we timed it really well for the whole wave of, cloud computing,
Yeah.
enterprise software, software as a service. And so we've just had a number of, B2B SaaS and fintech and other types of success stories that have come out of the tech village.
Yeah, it's amazing. I remember when you did that, and I thought back because I don't know if you knew this about me, David, but I used to run YMCA's back in the day, so I
Hmm.
got to run the Chicago YMCA system, which New York and Chicago were the two largest in the world, and so we built a number of Ys. Unlike you, it wasn't necessarily my personal investment money, but it was donors and all. And when you took on that big building, I'm like, oh, that's going to cost David more than he thinks it's going to cost.
It
But
did.
you
You're
stuck.
right.
Yeah, I know. But you stuck with it, and it now is it the fourth largest in the country?
That's right. Yeah, it's the fourth
Yeah.
largest tech center in the country, and it's been phenomenal. It's been a wonderful experience.
And now there, and you and I guess ATDC were a couple of the catalysts for that. But now there's I know, and back when I was looking at tag, I mean, some of them are really small, but there's something like 100 different, if you include the Romes of the world and other places,
Yeah, and
there's a
switch
lot.
yards. There's a ton
Yeah,
of great ones.
yeah. So you guys were some of the impetus behind that, knew it could be done. So, um, and for those of you that don't know, the rooftop's great too for different events and things like that. So make sure you check
Yes,
it out.
yes. And we just redid it in the past 6 months. We new flooring, new shade structure, new fans, better Wi-Fi. Everything's been upgraded. So it's really nice on the rooftop.
So, sticking with the entrepreneur theme, lessons learned in terms of just even with the first and second one, but even now you've done 10 of them of your own, but lessons learned about entrepreneurship and scaling a business. What would be your advice to people just in terms of what you think about scaling? I know one thing you said is start big. I want to
Yes,
talk a little bit about
yes.
that.
Yeah, I've learned a few lessons along the way, a lot of hard knocks. A couple of my favorites. One is that most entrepreneurs and their the initial idea is wrong. The initial idea isn't the idea that ultimately is what becomes successful. So for Hand and Hill, my first company, we started out more of a small business product that was 30 bucks a month, and we were ultimately successful with the more mid-market product that was, roughly 30 to $50,000. So we shifted up market, shifted the product. For Pardot, we initially started out as more of a lead gen tool where people could buy leads from us, and then we pivoted to be a software provider so that businesses could generate their own leads and nurture them. So my first real lesson learned there is that the initial idea is almost always wrong. And
Interesting.
so as an entrepreneur, you got to have an opinion and you got to have a direction you want to go, but then you have to be open-minded to iterate or pivot to find the even better opportunity. So I like to emphasize more of the market and then zig and zag to find the best idea within the market. So entrepreneurs, it's important to start with an idea because that gives you a direction, but really cultivate the market and then you'll zig and zag to find the best idea within the market. So I'm more of a markets guy and less of an ideas guy, although of course they're tightly related. And then another big lesson learned is that I would say the number one reason entrepreneurs don't succeed is that the idea that they choose is only incrementally better than what's on the market. And it's really hard to change people's behaviors. And so I'd like to emphasize that the idea has got to be 10 times better than the substitute, the alternative, not 10% better. And so most ideas that I see are only 10% better than what's out there. And the vast majority of the time, 10% better isn't enough to get people to change. It's got to be 10 times better.
That makes sense. Going back to your first point, do you think you see a lot of entrepreneurs, and can you coach them out of that, that they're more set in their ways? You know, maybe they come out of a Georgia Tech or something and say, this is the product, this is what I developed, this is my thing, or are they more flexible than
Sometimes.
that?
Yeah, my favorite entrepreneur archetype to work with is one that has already been a full-time entrepreneur and it did not work out, and they want to go do it again. And when they want to go do it again, it's you can tell that they're committed to the craft. They truly want to do it, and they're much more open to feedback and ideation and collaboration. So my favorite archetype is the failed entrepreneur that wants to go and start the next business for those reasons.
That's interesting. It's a good segue into my next question, because I was going to ask you, because people know David Cummings and know the success story and know that you've started 10 companies and they're successful. But is there any failure you want to point out that was a takeaway for you? Because I personally believe you learn sometimes a lot more by a failure than you do by the successes.
Yes, absolutely. I've had several failures. The common themes on the failures, one is that I sometimes believe that I'm more right than what the market actually wants. That's sort of the field of dreams. Like if you build it, they will come. And the market could care less what I think. The market knows what it wants. And so I would say the hubris and the just thinking that I could will it and make the market want it. It's not going to happen. There's a reason that free markets work, and there's a reason that, America has done so well. And, you know, if people want to buy something, they want to buy it. And if you try to sell them something that isn't good or they don't want it, they're going to vote with their dollars. And so
Right.
I would say just thinking that I knew what the market wanted when I really didn't is my number one challenge. So sometimes it works out and I can adapt it, and sometimes I go off in a direction and it's just too far gone and it doesn't work out.
Since we have a lot of tech people that are going to be listening to this, I have a couple of questions really a little bit more to technology. You know, one is just you kind of touched on this, but was there at one of your companies a significant tech challenge? And how did you overcome that? So just kind of how you thought it through and kind of busted through and created something, from that, or pivoted, like you say.
Yeah, on the tech side, in the Hand and Hill days, it was all enterprise Java, J2EE, big heavy stuff. It was, a lot of enterprise infrastructure. In the Pardot days, we were all on the PHP LAMP stack. And so there was no cloud computing essentially when we started. So we were running a bunch of bare metal servers and managing our own data centers in two different spots of the United States and synchronizing data between them for failover, hot failover. And so, nowadays, those kinds of things are just table stakes. AWS and Azure and everybody else makes it super easy. So, entrepreneurs and developers today have it way easier than what we had to do 20 years ago. But with that said, there's more complexity around what's expected from a product and, mobile apps and web apps and APIs and cloud services. So, from my perspective, I think it's pretty phenomenal just to see how far technology has come. And then obviously to try to peek around the corners a little bit of, what's AI going to do? What's generative AI going to do? What is AR or VR? Are they going to finally catch on in a meaningful way? A lot of these types of questions are fun to ponder.
So that was a question I was going to ask you too. So maybe it's AI, but you want to pick one that's, the most significant tech advancement, excuse me, since 2007 that either you see now or you see that's around the corner. What's going to be a game changer? Is it AI or is it some, AI is a hot topic, obviously, but is it something else?
Yeah, no, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid on the AI side. I'm a big believer that it's the real deal. Just like we had the wave of cloud computing, we had the wave of, mobile apps and mobile devices. And of course, people are always asking what's next. And again, some people thought it might be virtual reality, it might be something else, but I'm drinking the Kool-Aid that it's going to be AI. And really the main idea is that we have so much information and we have so much stuff that happens, servers talking, people talking, devices talking, apps talking. And so, the holy grail of AI is going from the storage of the data to the so what from it. And whether that's the text component of it, like taking, Chat GPT and having it write a limerick for you, or it's the analysis side of it, where it's going out and researching things and actually synthesizing data and producing an output that would take a trained human 100 hours to do. The software can do it in 3 minutes. And so I think AI taking the stuff that we have and then synthesizing it and producing new valuable things out of it, I think is a game changer. And so I'm really excited about it.
I think a lot of people would be interested in Tech Village. I always was confused early on about incubators, accelerators, real estate investments, investments of other sorts. How would you describe Tech Village in terms of, what your vision was, and has it changed in terms of, who's in there? And then I also want to ask you a question because we were talking about AI. Just curious about the companies that are in there now. Do you see them pushing some of those areas that are new? Like, is there a bigger percentage of companies that are looking at how they're going to address AI? Those are two totally different questions, I know. So,
Yeah, on the tech village front, the best way to think about it purely from a business point of view is that the tech village is an extended stay hotel.
okay.
And so an extended stay hotel, you might, say, hey, I want to stay at this hotel for a month because you're an insurance adjuster on site for the hurricane that just went through. And so you're camped out for a month. But the main idea is that, you can prepay for a month at a time. You get a space that's dedicated to what you're working on, your office or your desk, and then to have the resources that you would expect from it. And so business model wise, I would say the tech village has evolved where it's heavier on the programming and on the continuing education. We always wanted to have a component of the tech village to help entrepreneurs, but we started really as the tech village for the purposes of solving the office space and the
Okay.
community side. So entrepreneurs want to hang out with each other and they want a cool place to hang their shingle as their headquarters. So that's really where it started. And I would say the evolution of the tech village is that it really started to hum as we developed our events and programs and our speaker series and our panels and our recurring events and programs. And so I'd really say, being a cruise director of all things startups has really, been a game changer, but also something that wasn't quite the core when we first started.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you've evolved to you understand the need and seeing what the companies. And I imagine there's, as you started to mention, a lot of interaction between those companies, sharing ideas and things like that. So just creating that environment. Um, as I introduced you, I talked about the investor side as well, and people know companies like Rigor, Sales Loft, Terminus that you are a major investor in, and thousands of employees that have now emerged from your own companies and these companies. We touched on this a bit, but I guess two things here too. How much of your time is spent on looking at things to invest in? That's the first question. And then, can you pick out, now that you've been a sage leader in this space of both investing and building companies, what companies are going to be successful? Are there like three things you see and say, okay, this company is going to be a go, and this company's probably not going to make it? You already talked about, like, if they're set in their ways, for example, but maybe some more ideas.
Yeah, on the tactical level, some of the things that I look for, one is word of mouth. As much as these are all business software companies and you think of virality as something that's more of a consumer thing, businesses at the end of the day are people. And, while you want to sell something to a business, you're really selling to a person at the business. And so, the commonality for the ones that have had the most success are where the customers are effusive, where the customers are the raving fans, where the customers will go out and actively tell their business friends, hey, I'm using this product and I'm getting a ton of value from it and I would recommend it. So I'd say there's a word of mouth component that's really important. Another element that I look for is around the continuum of a nice to have versus a must have. And so in the YMCA examples, there's a friend of mine in Birmingham, Alabama. And so he had a SaaS product that was basically the system of record to run the YMCA. So everything from scheduling to hours of operation, just payroll, the whole system management. And so he described, 2008, Great Recession, you know, companies, YMCA's, gyms, other organizations were having a hard time paying the bills for a variety of reasons. And, he had one customer that came to him and said, his name is Dave. And he said, hey, Dave, I'm having a hard time paying the bill, but I've decided that I would pay for your software to run our YMCA before I would pay the electric bill.
Hmm.
And so that always stuck out to me. This software was so mission critical to run
Yeah.
the YMCA that he would make sure that the software was still running, the SaaS software to run the facility. He would pay for that before he would pay for his own electric bill for the facility. And so
Interesting.
that really crystallized in my mind that this software was so mission critical that it was more important than the utility bill. Now that's an extreme example, but it gets
Good
the point
example.
that a lot of software products are nice to haves, and so when budgets get cut or times get tough, those are the first ones to go. But the products that are mission critical, like you have to have it to run the business, those are the ones that have staying power. And then there's a related category that I'm a big fan of, and this one was introduced to me by my co-founder at Pardot, Adam, and he described it as being a software product that's in the path of revenue. And so in the path of revenue is a fancy way to say, like, this product unequivocally helps me make more money. When I spend $10 on this product, it makes me $100 of
Hmm.
new revenue. Or when I spend $10,000 on this product, it makes me $100,000 of additional profit. And so things like Pardot are in the path of revenue. You buy Pardot to make more money. You buy SalesLoft to make more money. And so those are two different categories that I look for. Mission critical, they help run some function of the business in a way that has to be run. And then in the path of revenue, the software, the product helps the business make more money. And it's unequivocal. Like it absolutely delivers an ROI that's quantifiable. And so if it doesn't fall into those buckets, or if it's a nice to have, or it's something that you can do without, then those are much more difficult businesses. So I look for ones that are mission critical and in the path of revenue.
So I also described you as a real estate mogul now that you've bought, is it 52 buildings, something like that, in downtown. Talk about how that came about, even finding 52 buildings. And then I'd love to hear, your vision on, by the time the World Cup comes around in 26, what that's going to look like. And there's probably more after 26, so we can go into that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So it wasn't something that we were actively shopping for or anything at all. I was at a Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce board meeting, and I was catching up with another CEO in town that has a big real estate company, and he shared that a developer that had been assembling properties in downtown Atlanta, basically where Atlanta started. So Atlanta started in the 1840s because three different train lines merged together. And the three different train lines, they merged together in what is now downtown Atlanta. Back then it was called Terminus
Germans.
because the trains terminated at this spot. And so really cool historic buildings. For a variety of reasons, they had been left untouched. Most of Atlanta, and especially downtown Atlanta, the historic buildings have been torn down and new buildings have been built over time. But this neighborhood, which is literally between the two originating train tracks, if you think about Mercedes-Benz Stadium and State Farm Arena, there's a bunch of train tracks right next to them. And then if you think about Five Points MARTA Station, it's on the original train line for Atlanta as well. And so this is the neighborhood that's basically between Five Points MARTA Station and Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And so a long time ago, this was called the heart of Atlanta. Now we call it South Downtown.
Right.
But anyways, in 2016, a local developer was looking for the next up and coming area of Atlanta, had seen some success in, the Ponce City Market, Beltline area, and so was looking for a cool historic building or buildings, just like Ponce City Market turned out to be. And so he found this collection of buildings in South Downtown, and he went out and raised money from some German families, and a German developer basically took over the project and had assembled 86 different properties representing 53 different buildings and a parking deck and a bunch of parking lots and some undeveloped parcels. And they had been focusing on turning it into cool loft office space. And so assembled tons of properties, was starting development, had already spent a huge amount of money on the conversion to office space. And of course, we all know with COVID and work from home and remote work, the demand for office space fell off a cliff. And so all the properties went into foreclosure at the end of 2023. And so myself and a few others, we spent a couple months working with the lenders to basically either buy the mortgage or get ourselves in a good spot to be able to foreclose on the properties and buy them on the courthouse steps. And so come January 2nd of this year, 2024, we were able to buy all the properties out of foreclosure. And so we now have 53 buildings as part of 86 properties, which is most of the private property between, again, Five Points MARTA Station and Mercedes-Benz Stadium. There's several government buildings in the neighborhood that we don't own, obviously, but the private property, we have most of it between those two landmarks of Atlanta.
And so what's the vision? What's that going to look like in 26 and beyond?
So this is really downtown Atlanta it's a tough one. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Downtown Atlanta's it's the front door to the whole city.
Right.
50 million people a year go to downtown Atlanta.
Wow.
And so that's everything from sporting events to concerts to huge trade shows to events. And so downtown Atlanta, for a lot of Atlantans, downtown Atlanta is something they actively avoid for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're optimistic that the same way that the Beltline introduced people in Atlanta historically and generally a car-oriented culture to one where there are pockets of Atlanta where you can walk everywhere, you can ride your bike everywhere. It has this feeling of a neighborhood that's not car-centric. And so in the same way that the Beltline has been an economic miracle for parts of Atlanta, we believe that downtown, with its urban grid, its big sidewalks, its great mobility access, there's tons of bike lanes and tons of train stations and just great walkability, that downtown is an area where people are going to want to live. Now it's going to take a huge amount of work. Most of downtown is built out as office buildings. There's very little housing. There's very little in terms of grocery stores and amenities that you would expect in a neighborhood. But we're optimistic that as Atlanta continues to grow, more and more people are going to want to be in a neighborhood where they can truly live without a car. They still might have a car, but they can
Right.
live without it. And so we're optimistic that, South Downtown, where we have the properties, is going to be one of the best examples of it because we have small street grids, we've got great urban fabric, and at the end of the day, we have a tremendous amount of history. So we have some of the oldest hotel buildings in Atlanta. We have some of the oldest department stores in Atlanta. We have some of the oldest five and dimes in Atlanta. So really neat, authentic character, a bunch of buildings from the 1800s. And so if you were in Boston or some other city, you're like, oh, 1800s, that's not even that old. But by Atlanta standards, any building in the 1800s that's, in the city or in the metro region is practically unheard of. And so
Yeah.
we think that there's a group of entrepreneurs and founders and innovators that want that authentic culture. So we have the culture of Atlanta from, 125 years ago. And so plenty of entrepreneurs are going to love the glass and steel buildings, just like the Tech Village in Buckhead is a beautiful glass and steel building. But there's a segment of entrepreneurs that want that late 1800s brick three-story building with tall ceilings and exposed timber and just a totally different vibe. And so we're building out the South Downtown neighborhood in Atlanta to be the largest innovation entrepreneurship district in the country. So
Wow.
we've got over 1 million square feet of space that we already own. We've got 86 different properties across the 53 buildings. We have 10 contiguous city blocks. So for 10 blocks straight, it's nothing but buildings and parking lots that we own. And so the opportunity to make the literal heart of Atlanta, the founding neighborhood, we like to say South Downtown Atlanta is the founding neighborhood of Atlanta for founders.
Right.
To
Interesting.
tie into that history, Atlanta was founded here, literally, and it's the neighborhood for founders. So taking it from a one building tech village in Buckhead to a whole neighborhood, a whole living laboratory. And so it'll be lots of tech villages with different themes. So one building focused on cloud computing, one building focused on robotics, one building focused on video games, one building focused on government software. And so having lots of buildings, and so it ends up looking like a college campus. And so there's a lot of nostalgia for the college campus for the walkability and the amenities and the continuing education and meeting people and the food and entertainment. The aspiration is for South Downtown Atlanta to be that entire campus for entrepreneurship and innovation.
And you see by 26, by the World Cup, that you'll have a pretty good dent in it. I know this is a long-term goal, but what's your
Yes,
hope there?
yeah, by the World Cup, which is a little less than 24 months out, we're going to have renovated 30 of the
Wow.
53 buildings, basically the ones in the core from that Five Points MARTA walk to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And these are some of the most historic, some of the coolest buildings you've ever seen in Atlanta. If you like authentic, if you like historic, just really charming buildings. And so really the core walk. So you get off at Five Points MARTA, you go south on Broad Street, you hit Mitchell Street. Mitchell Street is where Mercedes-Benz Stadium is, where the state capitol is, where Atlanta City Hall is.
Yeah.
And so you get off at Five Points, you walk down Broad Street, these amazing historic buildings. You turn right on Mitchell Street, and right in front of you is Mercedes-Benz. And then there's all these historic buildings on Mitchell Street. And so it's going to be one of the coolest, most unusual experiences in Atlanta, all targeted towards entrepreneurs.
And people listening in, is there any way that kind of help that you're looking for right now, David? Or, it's still in the early stages, but is it investors? Are you giving tours down there? How can
We
people help?
are. Yeah, we're giving lots of tours.
Yeah.
We're opening the eyes for a lot of Atlantans that
Yeah.
haven't spent much time downtown. We're sharing stories of, Atlanta's founding days and stories of the turn of the century, the late 1800s, early 1900s, different entrepreneurs that were in downtown. Atlanta, from its founding days, if you think about it, the name Atlanta was really just made up. So some civic boosters said, "Hey, we're called Marthasville." So Marthasville was the name after Terminus. And they said, Marthasville, that's not a world-class name. Let's take the Atlantic Ocean, of which Atlanta is nowhere near,
Right.
and let's do the feminine of the word. So Atlantic
Interesting. I never
is
heard
the
that story.
masculine, and literally some marketers. And here we are, 170 years later, we're still, cheerleading for the city, and we're still
Right.
all about commerce, and we're still all about marketing ourselves. But literally, the word Atlanta was made up to be sounding like Atlantic Ocean, of which we're nowhere near. And so
Interesting.
we're just trying to continue that founding commerce marketing orientation that we have.
So everybody listening, you heard it here first. No, not really, but anyway, it's good to know. Uh, so I have to ask you this next question because I read about it, was kind of doing a little research on you, David, about your family rules. And for those of you, and I'm gonna not let my wife listen to this, so but some of David's rules are no more than one morning meeting, one night meeting a week, a week's
Hmm.
vacation with family per quarter, date night weekly. So are you sticking to that? That's a pretty bold, ambitious, big, hairy, audacious goal, as they say.
Yes, trying really hard. What I've
Good for
found
you.
is by establishing those, it made it a lot easier to say no. And now,
Yeah,
of course, there's some exceptions to the rule, but at one point I was, 5 days a week having the
yeah,
8 a.m. breakfast meetings, and I was, two, three, 4 nights a week doing the drinks after work or going to the
yeah,
meetings or going to the meetups or the events. And it was hard to take a vacation because I was so oriented towards, just working 7 days a week. And so reading lots of books, talking to lots of people, I decided, hey, I'm just going to come up with a system for
right.
myself and for family and kids and spouse, and have worked really hard to stick to it. Of course,
That's
there are some exceptions, but
yeah,
when I have when somebody says, hey, come to our event, and I already have an event, that week, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say, no, I'm already busy.
yeah.
I don't say I'm busy that night. I keep it vague, but I'm not available. And so it's made it easier for me to say no to a lot more things once I established what my ground rules are.
That makes sense. Yeah, and that's great, David. And I think it's a good lesson for a lot of people that get really tied up in, whatever it is, golf games or evening events or morning events or whatever to prioritize family. So that's terrific. Just a couple more questions. I can't let you go without you giving a plug to what would you say to companies that are thinking about relocating or building their business, why they should consider Atlanta, why they should consider Georgia.
So I've been here for 22 years. I came here because our biggest customer was here in Atlanta. And really, the number one thing by far, I would say, is the can-do spirit of Atlantans. And it's a little bit like Southern charm. It's a little bit like, people being nice and considerate. But ultimately, for me, it's, people willing to help, people willing to go out of their way to help entrepreneurs, to help
Yeah,
startups, to help businesses. I think it's a friendly attitude, but it's a can-do attitude. People want to do stuff. So people come to Atlanta to further their careers, to make an impact, to get stuff done. And so I would say that Southern charm plus a doer, get stuff done type mentality has been, exceptional for me in my career. And recruiting people and building businesses. And so I would characterize it as the can-do attitude of Atlanta.
And how's the somebody was telling me the other day, because when I was at TAG, we always used to say that it was difficult, finding people. We weren't paying as much as some other parts of the country to bring in technologists. Have you seen that change over the years? How is it to hire good people here?
It's competitive everywhere. I think
Yeah,
COVID ripped the Band-Aid off of, work from home or work
right.
remote. And it really, COVID leveled a lot of the salaries,
Yeah,
because anybody can work anywhere. And, so Atlanta is not as affordable as it was before. It's still more affordable than the mega cities. Um, but in terms of talent, the talent is here, but the talent is also everywhere now. So I view it less as the local talent, and I
okay,
view it more as, a great place to raise a family, a great place to live, that, you know, just everything you would want in terms of the quality of life. Um, but yeah, talent is all over the place.
right. Yeah, that's a good point with remote. And just to add, because we're both plugging Great Atlanta and Georgia, that at TAG, we were one of about 70 groups called Technology Councils in North America. And what we found is there wasn't really any other group, whether it be California or Texas or places you would think would have these great hubs of people networking, that were anything like the opportunities for people in Georgia and Atlanta, particularly to help each other, as you say, but also just really to network and to find activities. People are so envious when we go to the tech council meetings. Now Larry Williams gets to go, but and
Mhm.
just saying, what are you guys doing there? It's pretty amazing what we have that a lot of the other areas don't.
It is. It's amazing. It's both the scale of it and the, willingness to share and willingness to, network and meet new people and help out. So I really like that. I like having a community that wants to help.
Well, David, I appreciate your time. I have one last question, and before I do that, just thank you for everything you've done for the community. And I don't know if everybody realizes it. Hopefully, people around the country will hear this and get to know a little bit more about Atlanta, a little bit more about you. But the last question I like to ask is if you could leave the listeners, and let's say they're entrepreneurs, but however you want to frame it, with one piece of advice regarding relevant leadership, what would it be?
My favorite thing that I would recommend generally is to develop a practice and a rhythm and a structure to become a learning machine. And so the learning machine idea is whether it's podcasts or books or meeting and networking with other people, or it's blogs, or it's tweets, or LinkedIn, or whatever it is, really be intentional about your continuing education. And so, from a leadership point of view, from a expertise, from whatever it is your specialty is, my favorite piece of advice is spend some time, be intentional about becoming a learning machine. And I think that's something that's been really impactful for me.
I love that. David, thanks. All the best. I can't wait to get a tour of South Downtown and hopefully can be helpful in some way.
That sounds great. Thanks, Tino.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.